welcome friends and colleagues onto this, our first quarterly webinar of 2017, which is a wonderful season of remembering and remembering. April is a time when we are recollecting both the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's Great Beyond Vietnam speech and the 25th anniversary of the Los Angeles Urban Rebellion. So we welcome folks far and wide. We see folks from, as usual, from around North America, from Canada, from the Midwest. From the East. Hello, Pam Brubaker. Nice to have you aboard again. Tevin and folks from Philadelphia. Weldon from Seattle. So a lot of folks. A few more may get on as we go. But we want to warmly welcome you all. Thank you for tuning in to this quarterly webinar. And we are going to get right to it.
Yes, I want to add my welcome too. Thank you all for joining us. So tonight we want to begin by acknowledging where we are in liturgical time. This coming Sunday is Palm Sunday. Sunday is Palm Sunday. And it is often celebrated in our churches with much joyous palm waving and marching and festive spirit. We often lose sight of the fact, however, that the original Palm Sunday was an act of political theater by Jesus and his followers. So we want to refer all of you viewers to our March 2013 webinar, in which Ched offers a detailed look at the political context and character of Luke's Palm Sunday narrative. And this is available on our website as a recorded webinar. So please go and check that out. And if you have any questions about that, you can email Chris and he'll guide you through how to get that. We also forget that in Luke's story, the raucous Palm Sunday parade concludes with Jesus breaking down and bitterly wailing as he looks over the city of Jerusalem, seeing both its violence and foreseeing the violence that would eventually come upon it. We want to start our webinar tonight, therefore, by remembering that painful and poignant gospel moment and how it is recontextualized in our own history and our own cities. Because we too cannot seem to recognize the things that make for peace.
5 years ago, in April 2012, we hosted another webinar that went into detail on this theme of Jesus' lament over the city. And again, you can find this recording on our site. At that time, I had just returned from spending Palm Sunday in Jerusalem in the middle of police riots. And at the same time, we were commemorating the 20th anniversary of the Los Angeles Uprising. So you might want to refer to that program to get a little bit more background. This month, however, we are commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Los Angeles Uprising, the largest civil disturbance in the history of the United States. This urban rebellion had a particular impact on Los Angeles's Korean immigrant community, which still refers to these events as Sai-gu, meaning April 29th, the day the riots broke out. In tonight's webinar, we'll be focusing on this experience in anticipation of a public event that we'll be co-hosting this weekend with our friends in Reconciliation. It will be a forum for the Korean Christian community and others to reflect on the meaning of 1992 Uprising and to help participants explore history, unresolved trauma, and justice issues today. And we're so delighted that we have with us Sue and Hyun, who you see in the upper right of your screen, and in just a few minutes we will be giving them their proper introduction.
But for those of you that are not from Los Angeles, a little bit of detail about those events. On March 3rd, 1991, Rodney King, an African-American motorist, was pulled over by Los Angeles police officers after leading them on a high-speed chase. Once pulled out of the car and put on the ground, King was beaten severely by 4 officers. A bystander famously videotaped much of this incident from a distance. On April 29, 1992, a jury in a Simi Valley court composed of 1 Latino, 1 Asian American, and 10 white people, after 7 days of testimony and deliberation, acquitted 3 of the officers and were a hung jury on 1 of the charges for Officer Powell. Within hours, riots and looting went off around Los Angeles County, and it spread to other cities around the country as well. Over the course of 4 days, 63 people lost their lives amid the looting and fires that ravaged the city. 10 were shot to death by law enforcement officials. An additional 44 people died in other homicides or incidents tied to the rioting. 14 of these were white folks, 2 were Asian, a Vietnamese and a Korean, 28 were African American, and 19 were Latino. The rioting destroyed or damaged over 1,000 buildings in the Los Angeles area. Approximately 3,600 fires were set, with fire calls coming once every minute at some point. The estimated cost of the damages was over $1 billion. Some 9,800 California National Guard troops were deployed to take control of the situation. 3 days after the violence began, federal troops from the 7th Infantry Division and the United States Marines from the 1st Marine Division were also sent in, and some of these soldiers stayed in Los Angeles as long as May 27th. Nearly 12,000 people were arrested, most directly related to the rioting.
I was on the streets during those days, trying to keep the peace while working for justice in Northwest Pasadena, a section of Los Angeles County. Those events profoundly seared my conscience, because this was the second time that I'd seen my city burn. The first time was August 11th to 15th, 1965, during which time Los Angeles burned in reaction to the beating of a black man by white cops after a routine traffic stop. I was 10 years old, but I can still remember the acrid smell of smoke in the air. This Watts rebellion, though largely contained into south central Los Angeles, was significant both for the city and the nation. 35 people died, 900 were injured, property losses were $225 million. Again, federal troops were called in to occupy our city. Although Watts was only one of a string of summer urban riots throughout the decade of the 1960s, it became a symbol for disaffection and racial and economic injustice. It reminded the nation, if only for a moment, of the inevitable violence that sooner or later erupts when and where justice is lacking. Just like Jesus' lament over Jerusalem, we just don't know the things that make for peace still today. Watts became a national symbol of black unrest and white suppression. So a few days after the riots burned out, Dr. King came to town and was deeply moved by the conversations that he had here about systemic civil rights violations and economic and social discrimination. A riot, he said, is the language of the unheard.
This memory figured prominently into King's most prophetic sermon, given less than 2 years later in New York. And yesterday was the 50th anniversary of King's Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence, given at Riverside Church. In it, King was prophetic in both senses of that word, speaking truth to power and anticipating the historical consequences of our collective choices. He recognized that disenfranchised inner-city youth who were rioting were only mirroring the violent behavior they saw in their nation around the world. This sermon was the culmination of King's lifetime struggle for the soul of America and was his most consequential address. He was assassinated exactly 1 year later, almost to the hour. Indeed, his analysis remains disturbingly resonant today. We are part of a widespread campaign throughout this year that is being embraced broadly in peace and justice circles, and we refer you to the 2 websites listed here to learn more about the speech, especially the series that is running through Lent on radicaldiscipleship.net. King began the speech lamenting that the Johnson administration's war on poverty had been, quote, broken and eviscerated as if it were some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war. And I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor, so long as adventures like Vietnam continued to draw people and skills and money like some demonic, destructive suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and to attack it as such. King then named economic conscription. The poor had to fight and die in extraordinarily high proportions relative to the rest of the population. We were taking the black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Harlem. King recognized the cruel irony that there were more options for poor people of color in the military than in civil society. Yet the former was enforcing a racist foreign policy, thus adding cynicism to the process of death. Deeply impacted by the urban uprisings during the summer of 1965 in Los Angeles and 1966 in Chicago, Brooklyn, Cleveland, and other cities, King summarized what he had seen in some of the most powerful rhetoric of the Riverside speech. As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they asked, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? They asked if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government.
The great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, the foremost voice in American Jewish peace and justice theology, marched with King on many occasions. Just 10 days before Dr. King's assassination, Heschel challenged his own community to pay attention to the work and witness of Martin Luther King. His is a voice, a vision, and a way, said Heschel. The whole future of America will depend upon the impact and influence of Dr. King. But we did not listen to King. And after the Watts riots, things continued to get worse in Los Angeles for the poor and marginalized communities. This is a picture of Sweet Alice Harris. She's a community organizer based in Watts since the 1950s. The founder and executive director of Parents of Watts, a local youth outreach group. I first met her at a 25th anniversary forum on the Watts riots back in 1990. She was asked at that forum why the riots had broken out back in 1965. They broke out, she said, because the cup of oppression just kept filling up and finally overflowed. And then she took a hard look at the audience and said, and it's filling up again, and it's about to overflow again. Sure enough, less than 2 years later, Los Angeles burned again. Tonight we want to focus this 25th anniversary commemoration on aspects of Saigu that are not widely recognized and understood, namely its impacts on the Korean community in Los Angeles.
And so to help us do that work, we want to welcome our dear friends and colleagues from Reconciliation, Sue Park Her and Hyun Her. Sue and Hyun are both pastors in the Mennonite Church and founders of Reconciliation, a nonprofit committed to exploring ways to create a peace culture in the Korean American community. We are honored and grateful to partner with Sue and Hyun in the work that God has called us to do together. So, Sue and Hyun, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's webinar and for the work that we will get to do together this weekend in Los Angeles. And so where we'd like to start tonight is to ask you to tell us a bit about yourselves. Give us a little bit of autobiographical material and talk to us about your immigration stories to the Los Angeles area. When, how old were you when you came? Why did you come? And then what did you find when you got here?
And we know they're different for each of you.
Yes, of course. So whoever wants to go first.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yes.
Yeah. Compared to my wife, I came here to LA quite late. After military service in South Korea, I came here when I was 27, so 5 years after LA Uprising. So today's story is mostly about my wife's story, her experience as she grew up in Los Angeles area last 37 years. Yes.
Hi, my name is Sue Park Her, and I came to the U.S. when I was 8, and so now you guys know how old I am because it's been 37 years, and I came with my whole Park clan. We had my aunt here, who had a son and a daughter, and they said, "Gee, I wish we had some family here." They invited us over through family visa, and about 25 of us came together on 2 separate planes. So all of a sudden, from no family, the Kwans had like too many in this little 3-bedroom house. And we have quite a lot of interesting stories from those days. We thought we hit paradise because there was like a box of bananas and a box of oranges, sun-kissed oranges, and Dole, I think, bananas, just waiting there by the kitchen. And we're just like, wow. And we would gobble it up, and the next day it was gone, and the next, and the next day they would get another box. And I just remember having just abundant supply of these of oranges and bananas. That's one of my first memories of being in LA and being with my family and starting all over here, starting a new life with new hopes and the American dream, right? That a lot of immigrants come with, and also have dedicated their sweat and their energy and their time to make this possible for the whole family. So yeah, that's kind of how we came. And we first came to Temple City, and again, a lot of immigrants, wherever they have that first initial contact, they kind of stay within that range. And so I lived in Temple City, Arcadia, Pasadena, back to Temple City, now back to Pasadena. So we've always stayed local, other than, of course, our time back in Korea, serving at a church there. So yeah, that's kind of how we started I came to the States in 1980.
Yeah. And Sue, what are some of your early memories? I think we know that you were at UCLA when the LA Uprising Rebellion happened. What are some of your memories before that about, I know your folks, I think they owned a store. What are some of your memories of how you were in the city, how it was to be a new immigrant in Los Angeles, a part of the store?
Sure. My parents, as many first generation immigrants, even though they were educated in Korea, they really can't find the right job, and the language and the cultural differences really left them with the option of possibly starting a business. So we had a little corner market on 7th Street, about 2 blocks away from MacArthur Park. And so that was my hood. And we would, and I have fond memories during that time. And I think just learning to work with different people in that community, right? People who are homeless and drunk and are coming for, their $1 wine. We've also met with little kids. We've watched kids kind of grow up in that city, and seeing them grow up and getting their milk. And my dad would always be generous and giving them an extra mango that's about to, go ripe. And I remember those good memories around there. And then my parents eventually opened up another store, this time a clothing store for women on Hollywood and Vermont. And the Park clan, they kind of started this business together. And so we had about 20 different clothing stores for women. And ours was right up there. And so again, that kind of got us, I think as an immigrant daughter, you don't have vacations. For example, I've never gone skiing in my life because those are the crazy Christmas holidays and Thanksgiving holidays when the store gets really busy. And so we would always go and help out with my store, help my parents out. And so those are my formative kind of memories. Yeah. When I was in college, again, I went to UCLA, so that was close enough that I would come back and on the weekends help my parents at the store. And I think that was when I really realized just the love of that diversity in our communities, and that I could kind of learn how to engage different people of different cultures. I had to be nice to them, they're our customers, and some of these regulars have become family. And again, like growing up, seeing them grow up from a little girl to this young woman, seeing them come with their babies, and just kind of seeing that kind of world through this little store on Vermont.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I wonder, do we want to move to this?
Yeah, before we're now going to move to a couple of testimonies that Reconciliation has curated, two different voices of who experienced the 92 riots. Before we move to that, Hyun, you said you came to the States 5 years after the LA riots. So you would have experienced this on the news in Korea.
That's right.
What was that like? How were Koreans experiencing this, and were Koreans seeing the impact on the Korean immigrant community in Los Angeles, or was that difficult to see in the news reports?
That's a good question. That time I was in the military service, so I didn't have the enough information from media or anything, because it's the military in South Korea is kind of restricted. So 1992, I didn't have any idea what happened in LA. But later I was discharged. After I discharged, then I heard the news. After I came here, and Sue's parents, from time to time, they share the story about it. But I didn't feel like it's my story kind of things. And I was studying at Fuller Seminary, and I always thought about I'm going to go back to South Korea, and this is not my immediate context kind of thing. So it wasn't my story. But since I came back here after my ministry in South Korea, 2005, and more when I been engaging with Korean people here, the immigrants, this story has shaped a lot of Korean people's perspective on other ethnic groups, and even their theology and many things. They were so impacted by this incident.
Yeah.
So
So
since that time, how we're gonna live together as a good neighbor. That's one of the important topics as a follower of Jesus Christ here.
Yeah. And so this I think is pretty characteristic of the realities in Southern California today. Sue had experience of these uprisings in her family. You did not. Similarly, I was in the middle of all that in 1992. Elaine was up in Fresno, although there was some impact up in Fresno, California. This is one of the reasons why we want to take this moment and remember these events, because whether or not we were here at the time, these events impact all of us who dwell certainly in this region in Los Angeles, but also more broadly. And so we want to honor an aspect of this story that is really unique to the Korean American immigrant community. And we'll now ask Chris to cue up the video. This is a video that Reconciliation curated just this week. And Sue, do you want to introduce the video?
Sure. This is a story of Sukja Kim. She was a recent immigrant, and she'll talk a little bit about her story. She came to the States when she was in 1985, and shortly afterwards, and some of you guys have been to swap meets, right? A lot of immigrants can't afford to start up a business in one of the stores that cost a lot to start up. And so they would start at swap meets. And so she kind of talks about the day, what happened in April of 1992 at the swap meet. What she does share later, but it's not in our video, is that the same year, in April of 1992, after this happened, and I think in November, her husband passed away. So this was a very traumatic year for her, and she has three children, right? That are now, one of them is our dear friend, and she will kind of share what she experienced during that time.
Okay. And Chris worked real hard uploading this video. The subtitles are a little hard to read, so Sue is going to read them out loud so our listeners and viewers can really see this incredibly poignant testimony.
해운대 호텔로 갔거든요.
그때는
우리 엄마 아빠도 해운대로 갔다 오셨어. 근데 이제 막 아이고 잘못 이거 잠자리 나는 것 같아. 이거 살이 다 비치는 그런 것들 가서 찍었는데.
어머니 이런 사진이요. 아가씨 어렸을 때 얼굴이랑 되게 비슷해요.
네, 저는 토렌스에 사는 김숙자라고 합니다.
I live in Torrance, and my name is Sukja Kim.
때는
In 1985,
그러니까
I came to the United
1985년
States in 1985.
1985년에 오셨죠?
Shortly after
1985년에
coming to the U.S.,
왔는데 온 지 얼마 안 돼가지고
I had a business in Midtown Swap Meet, right next to Wilshire Police
수암시
Station.
있었어요. 근데
I
거기서
sold
남자
men's
가게를
clothes
했는데
at the swap meet.
그날 폭동이 났다고 그래서 일찍 문 닫고 들어왔는데 그
When we
이튿날
heard a riot broke out,
이제 이웃
we closed the
가게
store early
아저씨한테
and went
전화를
home.
받고 새벽에 갔더니
Early morning the next day, I got a call
길바닥에
from another
파킹라세
retailer, so
뭐
I went to the
양말에서
store
티셔츠 온갖
early
물품들이
morning.
바닥에
There's
떨어져 있고
socks, shirts,
그리고
all
우리
kinds
가게도
of items
들어가
littered
보니까
around the parking lot.
이런 그 문도 막 다
I
찌그러져
went into our
있는데
store and the shutters were all bent and
그래서
broken.
그거
The
뭐
cash register was on the floor.
계산기 통에 땅바닥에 그냥
They even took all the
굴러있고
coins.
동전까지 다 가지고
A lot of
왔더라고요.
our clothes were missing.
보니까
As I
뭐
was
옷도
cleaning
많이
up, someone said,
없어지고 뭐
Look
그랬는데
out, the looters were coming again.
사람들이 지금 폭도들이 몰려온다 비켜라 뭐 그냥 거기 있지 말고 나가라고 그래갖고 좀 정리를 하다가 왔죠. 그랬는데 뭐 이쪽 문이 4개였는데 이쪽으로 가면은
We had four
사람들이
main
또 이쪽으로 몰려온다
entrances at
저쪽
the
문으로
swap meet.
나가니까 또 그쪽으로 또
Someone
몰려온다.
shouted they were coming from
여러
one
사람들이
entrance,
그 가게
so we tried to
하시는
run to the other direction.
일시 경찰서 쪽으로
Then someone
몰려갔었어요.
said
그게
they're coming on the other side.
경찰서하고
Finally, we
우리
decided to run
미드타운
towards the
서울하고
entrance
파킹라스를 같이 썼기
closest
때문에
to the police station.
경찰서로 가면
Wilshire
안전할
Police
줄
Station
알았죠.
and the
근데
swap meet share the
급하게
parking lot, so we
갔는데
thought it would
보니까
be safe to go
경찰들이
there. When we ran to the
그
station,
불나고서
we
현장에
found
다
out that most of the police officers are
입은
not
분 한
there
분이 도와주겠다고
because they were dispatched to
자기네 차에
where the
타라고
fire broke
그러는데
out. There was only one
사람들이
officer
전부
in uniform, and he
겁에
said to get in the
질려가지고
car.
사복을
But
입고
some of us
가면
were gripped by fear and afraid to go with the
어떻게
officer in
피해를
uniform
당할까봐
because the angry looters could
못한다고요. 경찰복
target the
입은 사람
officer,
저
so we all
경찰차만 타고
scattered.
가겠다고 우리가 고집하다가 또 몰려온다는 소리에 사람들이 다 흩어져서 도망을 갔는데 또 남편하고도 또 연락이 안 되고 그날
I
남편도
couldn't get in
아침에
touch with my
데려다 주고는
husband.
또 다른
He dropped me off at
친구
the store and
가게로
left to go
가본다고
check on his
갔는데
friend's store.
그
We
남편
couldn't
아는
communicate
분
with each
병원에
other for several
있어가지고
hours while we were
거기 가서 좀
separated.
있었죠. 그러니까 한 몇 시간 동안은 우리 둘이는 뭐 이상 가족이 된 거죠. 그랬는데 어떻게 제가 이제 그때는
Back
뭐
then, we didn't have
핸드폰도
cell
없었고
phones, so there was no way to
어떻게,
talk in the chaos.
가게
I called the
혹시나
store in
이제
case he
남편이
went
와
back to the
있을까 전화를
store.
해봤더니
He finally picked up
저를
the
찾느라고
phone.
제가 차가
He knew I
없으면
wouldn't be able to go
토렌스까지
home in
집을
Torrance
못
without
가니까
him.
이
So he
사람이
came and
가게에서
picked me
기다리고
up.
있더라고요. 그래서 이제 남편하고 같이 이제 우리 집으로
On our way home, we
올라가는데
passed through South La Cienega.
그쪽
We saw many stores
라시아나가
burning all over.
그쪽으로
End of
근데
April was warm already, and the fire made the
가게들이
neighborhood even
불타고
hotter.
있었어요. 근데 그때
I was scared, and the
4월
fire made me even more
말일쯤이니까 되게
scared.
날씨도 더운데다가 불이 나니까 그 동네 주변이 막 너무 좀 뜨겁고 또 분위기도 무섭고 그래갖고 우리가 이쪽으로 가지 말고 저기 다른 좀 한적한 동네 길로 가자고 무서워서 도저히
We were
그
trying
길을
to
통과할
escape
수가
through the local
없었어요.
streets, but many of the roads were blocked. We had no choice but to take the 110
우리
South
동네를
freeway.
내려서 오니까
We barely escaped and
저희
finally arrived in
동네에는
our home in
주로
Turan.
백인들이 살았는데
Most of our
풀장 옆에서
neighbors were
선전한다고
white. When
여자들이
we got to
전부
the
들어 누워
apartment,
있는데
we saw women
너무 화가
sunbathing
나는
by the
거예요.
pool.
저희는
That
정말
got me
사지를
mad.
뚫고 왔는데
We
이
fought through
사람들은
chaos just
너무
a few miles
언제
away, and
폭동이
these people were
일어났느냐 또
clueless.
그냥 자기들끼리
It got
그러고
really,
있는 거
I got
보니까
really
괜히
angry.
화가 나더라고요. 저희들도 이제 그 한동안 가게를 문을 못
The
열고
swap meet was
있었죠.
basically
그렇게 이제 둘이 다
destroyed, and we lost our
실업자가
business.
된 거예요.
My husband and I were unemployed for 3
그러고
months.
있다니까 이제 그
Later, FEMA came
FEMA라고
to help, and they helped us to pay rent
정부에서
for 3
도와주는
months.
그런 기관인데 거기에서 이제 렌트비 석 달인가 그렇게 보조해주고 또 이제 하우징이라는 데서 그뭐
Then HUD
섹션에
came
그것도
to
이제
said to file papers in Section 8, which
서류를 다
covers
내서 거기에
70% of
합격이
the rent.
되면은
And I still benefit
인컴의
from Section 8.
70%를 도와준다고 했는데 어떻게 하다 보니까 저도 거기 이제 해당이 돼갖고 섹션에 그 혜택을 받고 있어요. 그때는
Back then, a lot of
한국
Koreans had small
사람들이
businesses.
뭐
Maybe other ethnic communities thought that
가게들을
we only
많이
cared
했죠.
about
다른
ourselves.
사람들
We
다른
could
나라
look like that to
사람들보다가
others.
그러다
We
보니까 이
really did
사람들은
work
한국 사람이
hard.
되게 그냥 자기네들만 잘 먹고 잘 사는 것처럼 그렇게 보였는지 몰라도 사실 참 열심히들 했죠. 우리 한국 사람들이 오자마자 얼마나 그냥 다들 뭐 아이들 교육시키는 것 때문에 왔다고는
Some people say they
하지만
came for
그분은
the children's
뒷전하고
education, but that came
먹고
later.
살기가
We really
바빴죠.
worked hard.
그때 그
We were on
사건들을
survival
생각해
mode.
보면은 너무
In fact, we were so
진짜
busy just
우리들이
trying to get by.
살기에 먹고
We
살기만
were really on
바빴어.
survival mode, so we did not pay attention to other ethnic communities.
여러 가지
In looking back,
얘기들을
honestly, we
크게
really didn't
기억하지도
listen to
않았고
other communities'
그저 뭐
concerns.
우리 동포끼리만 그렇게 그냥 서로 뭐라고 그래야 되나 그냥 서로 이렇게 협조하면서 그렇게 살았던 것 같아요. 그러니까 그냥 사람들이 좀 더 이제
We
넓게
included only other
생각해가지고
Koreans.
그 사람들을
I think it is
이해하고
now
너무
time to
그냥
think bigger.
뭐
I think we need to stop saying bad things about African
남미
Americans
사람들에
and
대한
discriminate
뭐
against the
그런
Latinos.
선입견도 버리고
We need to
서로
live
여러
together and
커뮤니티와
cooperate to
합동해서
create a better world.
열심히들 이민자들이 합동해서 살면은 이제 좋은 세상이 오리라고 생각합니다.
Sue, thank you. I know that you were one of the interviewees that spoke with her. Thank you for helping make that story available for all of us. We want to move to another friend's story that you would like to tell us. But first, is there anything that you would like to add about video, the interview that you did with Soo-yak Kim?
Mrs. Kim is a very animated. She's a fighter, like a lot of immigrant women. You know, like I said, shortly after her husband passed away, too young, and she really had to take care of and raise 3 teenagers, and it was a difficult time for her. But she's a survivor, and so you know, when I look at people like her in our churches and in our communities, I have profound respect.
Yeah.
They are not perfect. They still have those triggers of trauma, but really, they. I just have really a deep respect for them for sustaining us and for keeping us, keeping us alive, literally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And her compassion and seeing forward to what it looks like to live differently. I found that really powerful and poignant, that even though she went through such trauma, such horrific violence, she is trying to help the community move forward and heal.
Exactly. Her honesty of just recognizing, you know what, we only included Koreans.
Yeah.
When we said we, that was just for us Koreans, and we need to expand our understanding of the new we. That was something that I gained from her interview.
Yeah. Thank you.
I wanted to share a story of my best friend. Her name is Sue Kim, and she right now is currently living in Boston. And she wanted to share her story because hers is such a compelling one. So as you guys watch the slides, these were pictures taken by John Yu, a friend and a lawyer, and he has put together pictures from during that time when our community kind of got together. So it's a compilation of different places. So I can't really say it's one place only, but you could see that as I read this story, if I may. This is the story of Soo Kim. I was a college student in Boston at the time of the LA riots. Earlier that year in February, my father passed away from a stroke while preaching as a guest speaker in Killeen, Texas. I took a leave of absence from college to be with my mom and provide comfort, help take care of the bookstore, finances, and other family concerns. Economically, it was a difficult time for many in K-Town and beyond. Our bookstore was barely in the black. It was a devastating time while we witnessed God's work in our family in the midst of such pain and stress. With this personal family backdrop, the LA riots ravaged the community in April. We received news primarily from Radio Korea because the American news outlets did not provide enough information about what was really happening on the ground. Street names were mentioned, but they never acknowledged that they were K-Town streets until much later. As the riots started heading closer to K-Town, most store owners decided to camp out at their places of business because it was our livelihood. No one really had insurance. If the stores burned down, what would the families do? We risked our lives literally, but decided to guard nonetheless. Our family bookstore was on Western Avenue, just south of Olympic. We prayed all night as the looters and firebombers headed our way. We knew because of the smoke in the air, the red sky, and the reports from Radio Korea. The gunshots were booming and sharp. We stayed clear of the windows. Next door was a Korean Chinese restaurant, and the owners and the employers were also there, and they had guns. Some of the men had mandatory military training from Korea. Just before the rioters got to our block, literally 1 block away, something spooked them, and just our little section of Western was skipped over. The rioters veered off and found another way north on Western. I will never forget the darkness of our store, my mom, brother, sister, an employee, and me, huddled in the store, knowing that terror and unreasonable cruelty headed our way. By the following morning, countless stores were burned, looted, shots fired by drive-by shooters and by ex-military Korean men on rooftops, defending their livelihood. The police were nowhere. We heard on the radio that they were guarding Beverly Hills. In the midst of the madness, a van full of old Korean women and a pastor from Van Nuys delivered kimbap to us, the Korean sushi, in a roll, and many others throughout K-Town. We cried. I will never forget their kindness. They were determined to help others in the midst of danger. There were also Korean gang members, and they had guns, and they were willing to help wherever they could, defending stores or running errands for people, because this was our Koreatown. The K-Town community rallied and bonded, but also realized how isolated we were. There were no community spokesmen. The media did not cover correctly. The police left us to protect ourselves, and a burning desire in the hearts of 1.5 and second generation Korean Americans to become activists arose. That includes me and her. As we marched, the Peace March, we also felt our continued helplessness and anger. The media did not cover it properly. Friends in New York, the East Coast, and even in the San Fernando Valley did not know what happened. But how can those who saw the fires and were shot at ever forget? And I asked her how the riots changed her. How did it change my life? It instilled in me and a generation of Korean Americans the importance of engaging in civic organization, being an activist, about caring for the human condition. Rather than complaining about a lack of voice, I wanted to be the voice. Over the years, there have been moments of anger when faced with racism, but through it all, grounded in faith and trust in the ultimate peacemaker, I have learned to be a mediator, peacemaker, hopefully to the best of my ability. Even now, I am helping with the development of an exhibit at the museum where she works. She works for the LA Children's Museum, Boston Children's Museum, right? Is that what it's called? And she's helping to develop an exhibit at the museum titled Our City, designed to build cultural understanding and empathy, spark conversations, and inspire individuals and communities to appreciate and celebrate diversity. It will help teach children and families to shatter the us and them stereotypes and prejudice and work through the implicit and explicit biases. We need it now more than ever. Boston or LA, London or Hong Kong, every city and community faces socioeconomic challenges, racism, misunderstanding, cruelty. Am I discouraged by the seemingly never-ending cycle of hate manifested? No, because there's hope in the Korean grandmother who delivered kimbap to the discouraged. There's hope in a gang member who served the community the best that they knew how. There's courage in a few African Americans and Korean Americans who marched together rather than exchange gunfire. There is joy in the little children from all backgrounds that I witnessed playing together in the museum.
Beautiful. Thank you.
We'll let Chris keep cycling through these pictures, which tell a story of the immediate post-riot reaction or response of folks in Koreatown. Sue, you were at UCLA at the time, and walk us through just briefly the ways in which the Korean community organized in the immediate wake of the violence, how they marched and how they advocated for themselves and how they tried to tell their story when the dominant media was ignoring it. Could you walk us through some of that?
Yeah, I think when the LA riot broke out, like Sue Kim said, there were no spokesperson to go to. And so the media came and rushed towards a place like UCLA, where they knew that we can speak the language. But the problem is that we never knew how to tell our story. We never had the opportunity to know or to talk about our story as immigrants. We knew our family stories somewhat, but we didn't know how to put that in context of our city, context of the socioeconomic pressures that was brewing in the city. And so we tried to tell our story, but did not tell it well. It was fragmented. It was we just didn't have the framework to speak. But here and there, we would see different people kind of coming together. Angela O, she's in one of our slides. She was a real big spokesperson for us. But again, that was only one person. So what we try to do is we, as a community, said, first of all, we need to help people because the media is covering us as these vigilantes, kind of these gun-loving, violent, freakish, immigrants. And so we need to let them know that we are for peace, that we understand what happened with Rodney King, and that we do not condone violence. And so some of the organizers from the city came together and put this on Olympic Boulevard, Chattanooga Lane, and we were there yesterday. And we'll see some pictures of that as well. We try to let people know that we are part of this community. We're not going anywhere. That we want to tell our story. We don't know how to tell it well, but we are part of the city. We're not foreigners who are going to we're not here just to take our money and leave. That we want to do this right. And so the conversation started, and organizing started. And so I think the takeaway from this devastation is that we started talking to each other. We started just thinking, our parents basically told us, don't worry about anything, just succeed, like live the dream of an American life. And a lot of us were just going there, be a lawyer, be a doctor, and some of us said, no, this does not happen. We cannot just live in that kind of a silo. And so a lot of us gathered. This is a park off of it's Normandy Park. We started gathering in different places. And not only were the Koreans there, but we had African American alliances and Latino community members, and Caucasians and different people who were activists and peacemakers around the community did gather and wanted to hear what was happening. You'll see these people here too. We see a lot of Latino members in our communities also coming and wanting to hear our stories. So slowly and very hobbled and very imperfectly, we started coming together, putting aside some of our differences. Afraid, a lot of us Christians were afraid to hold hands with these radical, activists, and I think that's where our convergence kind of began. That our faith is not just in the churches. Our faith needs to be expressed on the street with our feet, and that kind of clicked in '92 for many of us.
There was this extraordinary peace march that happened. That in some ways people see as a defining moment for the emergence of the Korean community in Los Angeles. Say more, you've alluded to it, but say more about that peace march. That was such an amazing moment.
Yeah, again, for me, it was we needed to do something. We needed to let the media know that we are a community. And some of us, we needed to, when you have trauma, you need to go out there and shout. You need to go out there and organize. And so this was one of the most, it was a time when our community came, I think for the very first time. Different organizations in our small community efforts kind of came together. Different schools came together and started making these posters, started marching together. Grocers as well as lawyers, students, walking with swap meet owners, and did our best to kind of come together and to unite, and that's what I remember from that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Hyun, I want to bring your voice in here as someone who's reflected a lot on issues of conflict, and you work within a tradition of Korean Minjung theology, the voice of oppressed people, which has a long history in Korea of the marginalized and the poor, oppressed by the Chinese, oppressed by the Japanese, oppressed by Americans. How have your conversations with Sue and with other members of this community who have memories of 1992, how has that impacted your theology and your pastoral strategy as someone now firmly working within the Korean community in Los Angeles? Say a little bit about that, if you would, Hyun.
Yeah, that's a good question. We were wondering, I don't know if you guys know about the Korean immigrant churches here in U.S. A lot of Korean churches, I think more than 95% Korean immigrant churches that I know, they're split because of the power struggle. So Sue and I, and then my friends, we are teaching, conflict transformation and restorative justice program. The Korean people in Korean churches. And then later I realized the traumatic experience, even immigration experience itself, it can be a traumatic experience for these people. So this trauma, and then and also, of course, 1992, the LA Uprising or riot experience is kind of strongly impact these people in dramatic way. So we realize we need to deal with this trauma to be the church, be the peace church, and the follower of Jesus Christ. They got to know about how to deal with the traumatic experience and how we're going to engage with other ethnic groups as a way of peace, practice peace making with as a follower of Jesus Christ. So this the traumatic experience, trauma, how we're gonna deal with the trauma is very important for conflict transformation and restorative justice. That's what I learned as I engage with the Korean immigrants here.
And in a minute, we're going to invite you to talk to us about the broader work of reconciliation. But following on some of these thoughts, a question to both of you, as you both work with more recent immigrants coming in to the city, the people that you're meeting in your work. Do you think this story is being held well in the Korean community, or for that matter, more broadly in Los Angeles? Or do you feel like there's lots more work to be done to address more openly some of the trauma and perhaps some of the unresolved issues from 1992? How would each of you respond to that?
It's interesting because, for me, this is such an important event. The 92 riot was a turning point in my life. And so, of course, we're going to commemorate it, right? 25 years later. But as Hyun was talking to some of the people that we wanted to kind of bring on board, they said, why? What does this have to do with us? And so it was really helpful for us to have that conversation, because now we're recognizing, why would that matter from their perspective? And also what Hyun was talking about with different members of different churches, recognizing that a lot of these immigrants have trauma, to recognize that as immigrants, being a second-class citizen is traumatic. To recognize the historical trauma, the cultural trauma, that it would be an important lens. And 92 Uprising would be a really important point for us to start that conversation. To recognize that, yes, there is this historical trauma that we can talk about, that can open up our conversation of other experiences that Asian Americans are afraid to talk about or don't create the space to talk about. It's more like, just be strong, just pray through it, forget, forgive, and move on. That's kind of our theology, right, in our churches. And we're saying that, no, this concrete event is an opportunity for us to talk about some of the unresolved issues that we still hold, that we still bear. And so we're hoping that this event, this Friday and Saturday, would be an opportunity for us to create that kind of space for us to talk about these things. And not just with ourselves, but also get other community leaders of different ethnic groups and hear their story. first of all, we don't know how to tell our story, like I said 25 years ago. I don't think we still know how to tell it well.
Yeah.
And then I think our story can be made whole as we hear stories of the other ethnic groups, and to recognize, my goodness, they also experience something traumatic too. My goodness, they may have even crazier stories, that they carry, and to put our story also in perspective.
Mm.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is that is the piece of work that we all have to do to come to healing, is to figure out what are those stories that we carry in our bones, that our community carries, that is, what are the stories of the land that we are on, and then the other people that are a part of the land. What are all those stories, so that we can learn them and hold them together and find a path together to healing. So thank you. I wonder if you want to tell us a little bit about reconciliation and the work that you do there, which I realize, of course, this work we're talking about this weekend is a big part of that. And let me just say, for those of you who are from Southern California or in Southern California this weekend, please do join us for this event. Will there be an invite at the end? Yeah, we are doing this work with Sue and Hyun. We are commemorating the 25th anniversary of the LA Uprising and Rebellion, and really would encourage any of you to come and join us on Friday night, or for those of you who have friends in Los Angeles that you know of, or that are in Ventura County, in Southern California somewhere, please encourage them to get a hold of us if they do not know about this event, and come join us. One thing we can promise is there will be wonderful, wonderful food there. So come. Please,
Absolutely.
yeah. Please also, as Sue and Hyun are telling us about reconciliation, if you have any questions, now is the time to start typing them in, and then we will put them to Sue and Hyun after they have told us a little bit about reconciliation. But now really is the time to put them in. And I'm just noticing Chris put in the web address of the for information about the 429 event that we are doing this weekend. So please check out the website there. But Sue and Hyun, tell us about reconciliation.
Yeah, so this is reconciliation, right? Hyun thought of it, and I thought it was pretty good. Some people think it's corny, but it sticks, right? So there we go. We are based here in Pasadena, Los Angeles area, and the greater Los Angeles. We're kind of all spread over. But this kind of grew out of our passion for. Do you want to say a little bit? Let me just kind of give you a little bit of our background of why we're doing this here. We are located in Los Angeles and not in Goshen, Indiana, because we have a lot of Koreans here and a lot of Asian Americans. There's 10 million people about living in LA County. About 150 different languages are spoken in this area, and we have about 334,000 Koreans living in this area out of 1.7 million Korean Americans in the U.S. So that's a pretty significant portion. Again, these are calculated, these are numbered, right? If we talk about the undocumented Korean Americans here, the number is, and international students, it's a lot higher. You could also see that DHS estimates that 200,000 additional Korean Americans in the population are undocumented. Again, they've overstayed their visas or for different reasons. And I think that was real eye-opening for me. Again, living in a silo here in LA as Korean Americans with privilege, I didn't really realize that there were so many undocumented Korean Americans living in this area. The LA riots or the LA Uprising. The Koreans really don't like calling it the Uprising, and so this is a word that we're trying to, we intentionally put it as LA Uprising in our event, but even that, there's been a lot of comments by some people about why did you guys call it an uprising rather than a riot. So we framed that in how Koreans understand it. 70 to 80% Korean Americans identify themselves as Christians, and 40% of those immigrants were not Christians before coming to the U.S. And my family is an example of that. We were not religious, but we came to America. We didn't know where to start, and we started at church. And about 4,000 Korean American churches are in the U.S. and over 1,400 are in Southern California. So this is a happening place for us Korean Americans. And so within this backdrop, we've started reconciliation. This is a little bit a rough sketch of the linguistic groups in LA, just to show the diversity of different languages spoken. And what we want to do is, we're a peace center in LA, and we really believe that the center of the gospel is the message of peace and reconciliation. And so there's more of that shalom theology that we want to help the Korean American as well as Asian American communities to understand, that is at the core of Jesus's message of the gospel. And we want to, recognizing Jesus' ministry as one of peacemaking and desiring to follow the way of Jesus in community, we want to educate and promote the culture of peacemaking. A lot of you know that Korea, we're still technically at war with North Korea. We've never signed a peace treaty. And so this culture of violence permeates in the Korean culture. There's a culture of violence, culture of anxiety, of that fear of them coming down, that permeates in our psyche. And so trying to change that culture is a big task. And of course, we're not going to be the only ones who are going to be doing it, but that's what we're trying to do.
A lot of Korean immigrants, they experienced Japanese occupation and Korean War and military dictatorships. So that's why they came here to seek the safety zone.
Yeah.
So that in our psyche, is looking for some kind of safer safety zone that permeated their lives.
And so we want to do 4 things, and I'll kind of go over this. Let me just again, I'll go fast. Yeah. So we want to do some exposing that this is not new. It's already been there, and a lot of you guys are already part of this, so you already know the truth that the ministry of reconciliation is the core of Jesus' call to his followers. So we are trying to help them to recognize the Bible in new ways. And so we have this discipleship school that we have these like semester courses, and we talk about different topics, including restorative justice, peace, spirituality, economic justice. Some of these topics, how do you live, peacefully? How does housing deal with justice? Or peace? When we talk about peace, Koreans just don't understand what we're trying to do, and so we're trying to make it very concrete. And so these are some of the topics that we talk about. You'll notice somebody that you're familiar with here too, and some of our speakers. Because we're Mennonites, we have some connections with some of people who have been doing a lot of peacemaking and justice, restorative justice, like Elaine. And so we have partnered with them. We've also brought other Korean theologians, activists, and authors who are in this peace and justice movement to integrate their passion with their faith and helping people in the church to understand the importance of this. So like Pastor Kim, this is an example. He makes beautiful art, and he's trying to help people to recognize what does it mean to be a Christ follower with our gifts, and how do we do this practically? So it's really beautiful. Actually, Pastor Kim is Sukja Kim's son, so that's the connection. And we're also trying to educate churches to live out their call as peacemakers. So we have seminars. We lead. These are not these week, like a semester kind of courses. These are just one-day seminars to help people expose, or a weekend seminars, or we lead retreats and camps and those kinds of things. New words, right? Restorative justice, peacemaking. These are all new to them. Conflict transformation. They think we're speaking a different language altogether. And a lot of times what we do is I work with the second generation and talk to them in English, and then Hyun will work with the first generation and talk to them in a way that they could understand it better. And then encourage and equip participants to become involved in local communities. Okay, we're called to be peacemakers, but we live in America. So we need to, what does God have for us to live as people in the margins? How do we still love and host and be hospitable from the margins? So how do we become neighbors? So this is what we also want to talk about. So we do we do intercultural development, training, competencies. Elaine and I do that kind of training with our denomination and beyond. This was a workshop that we had interethnic and intergenerational. Like, how do we work with identity, history, and mission? So those are some interesting conversations that we try to engage. We're part of the Pasadena Gun Buyback and Peace Resource Fair. And sometimes we realize, you know what? Sometimes just showing up an Asian organization in peace work, we're like the only ones. And so we're like, you know what? Sometimes just being a witness, just being present, is part of being part of the movement. Not like we have to do a lot. And then one of the things that we love doing is this was last year, right? We said, okay, how do we do this? How do we, as Koreans, understand other ethnic groups around us? So we visited a mosque, and we had a Korean missionary who lived in, where did he live in?
Jordan.
In Jordan. Talk about that world. Right, Arab, Muslim communities, and what are they experiencing here? And then we visited the mosque and talked to them there, and that was the first time a lot of us have ever been to a mosque, right? Or Islamic Center. I'm sorry, an Islamic Center. Went to an African American church and heard about their stories. And so this was a real neat, and we learned about the, where is it? The U.S. history from a Latinx perspective. And what was really neat was that a lot of these, all of these workshops were conducted by Koreans who really understood their history. And so they owned it. You know what I mean? It wasn't like a Latino or Latina that came and we were translating for them. These are people who really understood their culture, and so it was really good. We have friends who come and other peacemakers, and we have dinner with them. One of the recent things that we did last year was we did a peace camp with youth. What the next generation of youth, Asian Americans, and biracial children, how do they understand how it means to, what does it mean to be part of LA? What does it mean to be part of this city? What does it mean for us to be peacemakers? So all this intersectionality. We visited Watts Tower with them, and it was interesting. It was the African American parents who were against us coming there. Again, the trauma. A lot of the people who have experienced violence in this area didn't want us to go there, and they said, "Do you guys even know how violent it's down there?" And so we also had to hear their trauma and recognize that that was important for us to understand. And then And then extend the vision. Okay, so God brought us into this community. How do we become neighbors with our community? But then we're also Koreans, right? So is there some sort of peace work that we can do in the Korean Peninsula? Or if you're Japanese, then what is the peace work that you can also do for Japan? Is there one? You know, like just finding ways for us to explore that. And again, for us as Koreans, North Korea is a big one, right? If you say you're doing peace work and you're Korean, everybody asks you about North Korea. So in 2012, we had a small table talk where we brought different people who are working for North Korea or working around North Korea or refugees. Some people are working with North Korean refugees here in LA. Some people are working with people in North Korea who think that refugees are traitors, you know, and you're working with different kinds of groups. How are they working? What are they listening? What are they hearing from different organizations? So we brought different people from different leaders from that community. And then the year after, Hyun went to North Korea and visited. And this was a very emotional and personal trip for you in many ways, right? His mom was from North Korea, and she's Korean citizen, so she cannot go to North Korea with a South Korean passport. But Hyun can, because he was a green card holder by then. Now he's an American citizen, and so he could go to and visit his mother's homeland. It was a very difficult and a beautiful experience. Do you want to say anything about that? Yeah. And then the year after, Steve Yoon, if you see the man on the left, as well as in the picture of the women, all the women, there's a Caucasian woman, they're a couple, and they live in Pyongyang.
With 3 children.
With their 3 children. They're biracial children, and they live in Pyongyang. And they do amazing work. We could talk about what they do for hours, but basically he's a chiropractor, and he has a doctor, and he's almost done with creating a spinal research center in Pyongyang. So incredible work that they're doing. So, you know, in 2013, Hyun went to North Korea. 2014, Steve came from North Korea to talk to us about what's happening there. And then 2015, we had a bike ride to raise money to send shoes to the orphans in North Korea. And we raised enough money to send 1,400 pairs of shoes. So that was that was fun, which also got us to go to a North Korean shoe verification trip in 2016. And because our son, was also part of the bike trip in 2015, that all of them were invited to go. So then in 2016, they went to North Korea. And so it's been this really neat journey. This wasn't something that we had planned. And this coming year, this year, 2017, if there's no war or some crazy thing that happens, Hyun is planning to go to North Korea next month because he was invited to start a dialogue, planning a small forum with
reconciliation.
Yeah, a reconciliation forum in an academic setting with some top historians, social scientists and political scientists, scholars about what does it mean for them to make peace? What does it mean for them to reconcile? Yeah, and so we want to go there to really listen, because we're saying the same words, but maybe they have a completely different understanding of what that means and how they interpret that. And so we're really excited about this opportunity that has opened, but and we know this is a very rare instance, because even Steve was like, this is unusual, but at the same time we realized that this is a very volatile time. But it's always like that, right? So we're hoping that next month Hyun will be in North Korea. And then I'm also part of this larger peacemaking trip or peacemaking team in partnership with Mennonite Central Committee and Duke Divinity School. And we have this Christian Forum for Reconciliation in Northeast Asia. And we go to different countries every year. It started in Korea, and then we went to Nagasaki, Japan, on their 60th anniversary of the bombing. And then last year we were in Hong Kong, and this year we're back in Korea, but we're in Jeju Island, where there's a lot of, and so we wanted to go to that, but you know, our son is graduating from high school, so we have to go to graduation. Not that that's not a bad, that's a wonderful thing. So anyway, this was a wonderful way for us to understand and to meet all these incredible peacemakers from Northeast Asia. And this was also an incredible place for me, because as a Korean American, I'm like, where do I fit in? You know, where do I fit in this peace talk with all these Northeast Asians, and felt out of place, but I found my place. I speak English. And so I can host, or I can lead worship, or I could facilitate. And that was my place. And so I've made peace with, I do have a place, and that's the gift that I could bring to this group. So it's been very meaningful in that way. Yep. And so some of the biggest projects for this year is happening in a couple of days. In remembering what happened 25 years ago, and also finding hope and finding our voice and recognizing and conversing with other ethnic groups about what happened, and to move forward together is our hope for this event. And we are so grateful to you, Chad and Elaine, for coming alongside us, because our, we've done primarily our work with our Korean American community, and you've really helped us. And this was our deepest desire, to really work with different organizations and different people who have the same heartbeat in Los Angeles. And we feel like this is a real opportunity for us to engage in that relationship and that conversation with the larger Angelino community here.
You have given us a thumbnail sketch of the incredibly broad and deep work that you do in reconciliation. And in narrating all of this, you haven't even mentioned that both of you pastor a Caucasian church, have done that for 3 years on top of all the rest of this, that you've got 3 beautiful children, and that you're very active both locally and nationally and internationally. We are such big fans of you and your work, and it is such an honor to work with you. I want to just ask one quick question before we give a little benediction. Elaine gives a little benediction. And that is, you've gotten some pushback from the Korean community, both for your work in the city here and also for your work on the peninsula. How do you navigate that?
You know, we live in Los Angeles. The world comes to us, and we're recognizing that what we do here can impact different parts that go beyond where we are. And so that line of those boundaries have kind of become more fluid for us. And that's a good and a bad thing. We realize that you cannot do global work without being local. We realize that you can't do local work without thinking the global work. And so, and 92 Uprising was a real reminder for us to recognize that. And so, yeah, that's how I would recognize that LA is a microcosm of the world, and so it for me it's not like one or the other. They come to us and we go to them, and so that kind of yeah, that's how I understand it.
Yeah. Our friends in Duluth, who themselves are trying to do restorative justice work, are wondering about relationships with Black churches, Latinos, how these communities are remembering the 25th commemoration. There are events, of course, going on all month in Los Angeles, many of them hosted by African American congregations. We will have representatives this weekend from Black and Latino communities to be in dialogue. It needs to be said, though, doesn't it, that one of the casualties of the 92 riots was years of Black Korean dialogue that had been formalized at the level of the city. The city was sponsoring a table of inter-community dialogue, and that was one of the things that kind of went up in flames in the wake of the uprising, and in some ways has yet to be fully put back together. And so we hope that our very modest efforts this weekend can just be one stream of conversation that can allow these spaces, as you were saying, Sue, these spaces to be created for folks to talk about the past, the present, and the future. Again, Hyun and Sue, we are so grateful for your friendship and your work, and it is really amazing work and exemplary peacemaking work, and we are honored to know you. So thank you so much for joining us tonight and telling just a little bit of your story and just a little bit of all the good work you do. Chris, if you'd take us back to the original slideshow, Elaine will offer a little bit of a benediction.
History, wrote the great American poet Maya Angelou over a quarter century ago. Despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. So tonight we have heard the story of trauma and resilience within the Korean community, particularly around the Los Angeles Uprising, but also the carrying of trauma in the immigrants' journey. And those of us that are working in justice, working for justice in different communities, we need to get to know these stories and get to know our own experiences of historical trauma, present-day trauma, and in the places that we live and that we carry. And Sue and Hyun have given us the gift of learning that story or hearing the story, how they carry it, and how the Korean American community carries it in LA. And so all of us, this wisdom reminds us that all of us need to embrace this vocation of becoming rememberers as we work for justice and peace in the communities where we live. Next one. Oops. Sorry.
Thank you for inviting us, and Chad and Elaine, you're our hero and heroines. We are following you as following Jesus Christ.
Thank you.
Appreciate your fellowship with us.
Yeah. We appreciate you very much. King concluded his historic Riverside speech in good Baptist fashion with an altar call and a challenge to commitment. He said, "Now let us begin. Now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world. This is the calling of the children of God, and our human family waits eagerly for our response. Shall we say the odds are too great? Shall we tell them that the struggle is too hard? In 1967, 50 years ago this week, in the midst of social fragmentation, King called for unity of purpose and exhorted people of conscience to settle for nothing less than the transformation of history. 1 year later, exactly, he was gunned down in Memphis while campaigning on behalf of low-wage workers there. The government's ongoing conspiracy finally succeeded in silencing the greatest prophet in the history of our nation. The Lorraine Motel, where Dr. King was gunned down, is now the National Civil Rights Museum, thanks to a protracted community struggle to commemorate that painful event. And directly under the balcony, where the dreamer took his last breath, is a memorial stone into which is etched a quote from the story of Joseph in Genesis. It challenges us still and haunts our nation like an unresolved chord. What will become of his dream? And standing in front of the poignant Memorial Park in Oklahoma City, another site of massive violence in our country, is a statue of Jesus weeping. May we who are followers of Jesus learn the things that make for peace.